Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. And today I am coming to you from the Hollywood Heritage Museum, and we're welcoming another terrific author today, and that is Marsha Gordon. She's the author of the brand new book, Becoming the Ex-Wife, The Unconventional Life and Forgotten Writings of Ursula Parrott. This ties into classic Hollywood a lot, and oh my gosh, we are going to have a terrific discussion. So Marsha, welcome to Hollywood Kitchen.
Thank you, Karie. It's so great to be here.
Yes, and tell us, and I'm sure many of the viewers, who Ursula Parrott was and why she matters today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, first off, Ursula Parrott was a best-selling author, starting with a book called Ex-Wife, which came out in 1929, which, thanks to McNally Editions, you can now read. This is a sensational best-selling novel about basically a young woman's experiences in New York City as a divorcee in the 1920s, as a woman working to support herself, and it's kind of very Sex in the City in some ways, but it's also a fairly serious novel about how hard it was for women in this particular time. It became, again, a bestseller. It was bought by MGM right off the bat. They paid $20,000 to make it into the Divorcee with Norma Shearer.
And we are surrounded in the midst of the fabulous Norma Shearer exhibit, which how long is this going on till?
Probably the end of October at this point.
End of October at this point. And
Yeah.
if you haven't seen it yet, please get down here and see it. It's fantastic.
And that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, so Darin Barnes, the world's foremost collector of Norma Shearer materials. And it's interesting, Norma Shearer kind of became an alter ego for a couple of years for Ursula Parrott because she wrote very personal stories. So the tale in Ex-Wife, which is about infidelity in a marriage committed by both the man and the woman, as the tagline for the film pointed out, and it's about double standards and male hypocrisy and all of these things. Norma Shearer fought to get this role. She had George Harrell, who had just arrived in town, take pictures of her in lingerie, and she left them on her husband Irving Thalberg's desk, which is what convinced him that she could play this very spicy role, right?
Yeah, it's completely turned her career around.
Yeah, so this is a significant movie. It was a smash hit. And even though Norma Shearer was nominated multiple times for Best Actress Academy Award, this is the movie that gave her that Academy Award. So Ursula Parrott, no Divorcee, no Norma Shearer Academy Award. So Ursula Parrott is right there in the heart of things at this pivotal point in Norma's career.
And you have to imagine at that point in 1930 when she won her Oscar, she is at the top of her game. So she is married to the boy wonder, Irving Thalberg. They've just had their first son, Irving Jr. She's got an Oscar. She's in this huge hit movie. So to follow up right away with another Ursula Parrott story was a tribute to Ursula and her power and her popularity at the time with Strangers May Kiss.
Yeah. Before we get to Strangers May Kiss, I just want to show Darin has in his collection this the contract that Ursula Parrott signed for $20,000 to sell Ex-Wife to be made into the movies. So that is her autograph on this contract. But so the next year, in Hollywood, if it works once, it's going to work twice, right? Is there a Strangers May Kiss there? So Strangers May Kiss was the next novel that MGM bought, written by Ursula Parrott, that was made also into a movie with Norma Shearer.
Very pre-code, by the way.
Both of these are very pre-code. Mm-hmm. These are movies that after 1934, it would have been really hard to make. Actually, they were really hard to make
even at the time.
1934. So for example, the MGM was told after they spent all this money on the Divorcee on Ex-Wife, that they couldn't call a movie Ex-Wife. I guess that was considered too crass. And so, being creative people, they were like, let's go to the drawing board. Let's call it the Divorcee. That sounds pretty classy. And they were like, okay, you can make that, but you cannot use the title Ex-Wife in any of your promotional campaigns. And so they never mentioned that it was an adaptation of Ex-Wife, but they always mentioned that it was based on a novel by Ursula Parrott. And this was like the water cooler book of the season, so everyone would have known that it was based on Ex-Wife.
Well,
Wasn't F. Scott Fitzgerald had a book that was it Great Gatsby at the same time, or which book was
Great
it?
Gatsby was a little earlier,
but she way outsold that. Like this book.
Yeah,
was...
so Ex-Wife sold 100,000 copies in its like initial run, and The Great Gatsby sold 25,000.
Yeah.
And yet, Ursula Parrott is basically forgotten today, and F. Scott Fitzgerald is considered one of America's great literary geniuses. Yeah. So tell us why that happened that way.
Yeah. So, wow, this is a long, complicated thing. I try to get into some of it in my biography of Ursula Parrott, which basically began also because I was doing research on a screenplay that F. Scott Fitzgerald was hired to write called Infidelity in 1938. And it was based on a story by Ursula Parrott. So I came to this project because I was like, what is this? Who's this woman I've never heard of, who the best-known jazz age writer was hired to adapt her story? And the more I learned about her, the more I thought, like, wow, she's incredible. And then doing more research to learn that she way outsold The Great Gatsby. And by the way, Parrott published 20 novels, many of them bestsellers. I would say the short answer to that is that she did not have an advocate. She did not have powerful allies the way F. Scott Fitzgerald did. So keep in mind, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby is pretty much forgotten by the late 1930s, early 1940s. And there are a group of male critics who decide, like, this is an important novel. And Malcolm Cowley is one of them. I mean, these are the top kind of cultural critics and literary scholars of the day. They start getting it republished. They start advocating for it. They start teaching it. In World War II, the American military sent 155,000 free copies of The Great Gatsby to soldiers overseas. And keep in mind how many times over that is from what the original sale was. Free. So all of those men read this novel, then they come back right after the war and they are teaching it and they're telling other people about it. Well, guess whose books were on a list of books you should not even donate to a library campaign to send to soldiers overseas? Ursula Parrott. Don't even bother. So she, like, the short is, she did not have an advocate. She did not have allies. She did not have people who were trying to make a case for her importance. And she drifted into obscurity. And once someone gets to that place, it's really hard to bring them back. So, which is why it's so exciting that people can actually read Ex-Wife, because, hearing her story is one thing, and learning about her, by reading my book is one thing, but reading her writing is so important because it really is a sensational novel in every way, and it's beautifully written, it's very moving, it's witty, it's sad, it's got kind of everything, and it's really focused on, again, a kind of women's experiences, so that, these are so marginalized in The Great Gatsby, and she really pays attention to that.
Wow. So I'm excited. I'm reading your book right now, and then when I'm finished, I'm going to read Ex-Wife. Yeah. So I'm excited to discover a new woman. I love learning about new writers, new women, new voices in literature.
Yeah, it was such a treat it was an honor to get to spend time. I mean, I read everything she wrote. So every novel, she wrote, again, 20 books, over 100 serialized novels, short stories, works of nonfiction. And to discover someone who had such a beautiful writing style, she had such a great wit to her writing, and she also really grasped how hard it was for women in this time of, on the one hand, more opportunity than they ever had before for education. She was Radcliffe educated. She could work and support herself when her first marriage fell apart. But she felt that there were all of these kind of consequences from those freedoms that were making women's lives potentially harder. And, the double standard that existed, the idea of burnout, women trying to do everything. She was talking about these things in the late 20s and early 1930s. Like, I would say a good 25 to 40 years before they became part of the cultural conversation. So it's a treat to read, look at this time machine from almost 100 years ago, right? Yeah. And to see that, getting surfaced in such an interesting way.
In reading the book, there are so many things I think I can relate to this. I can understand this, and born decades after.
That's right. So not to mention, there is phenomenal attention to like fashion, to nightlife, all of the great prohibition restaurants and bars that she goes to in the novel in New York City. It takes place in New York, where she lived. Parrott lived in Greenwich Village after she eloped with her first husband. So I think it's one of the great novels of New York City. I think it's very, at times, experimental. She actually includes the musical bars for Rhapsody in Blue, the Gershwin, within this one chapter that's all about the rhythms of New York City. So, again, I think it's a treat. I hope everybody reads this book.
I do too. The minute I heard about this, I called Darin and I was like, oh my gosh, we better get excited because this is really something cool about Hollywood history, about literary history that we didn't know about yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so Parrott, she went back and forth between Hollywood and New York, and she also worked for the like East Coast branch of Paramount and Astoria, and so she was writing for Claudette Colbert, and she was writing for Clara Bow, and then she was, coming to town and doing these various writing stints for, really almost every studio, it seems. And she sold her works to the cream of the crop, MGM and Paramount, and she sold it to Poverty Row producers like Tiffany Pictures, who made one of the great, fun, really racy pre-code films called Leftover Ladies, which was based on a manifesto Parrott wrote around the time Ex-Wife came out, and it is a raucous good time.
Well, speaking of raucous good time, there's certain lines in two of the adaptations of the MGM films that that stay with me.
Yeah.
And the Divorcee, when Norma Shearer says, "You are the only man in the world my door is closed to." That is so racy.
Yeah.
And then in Strangers May Kiss, she has the line, "I'm wallowing in an orgy," and I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, this would kind of shock people if this came out in a movie in 2023.
Yeah.
Much less 1931.
Yeah, so in both of these films, the premise is the female protagonist, who's Norma Shearer in both of them, kind of rebels against disappointment in her life by going on like the equivalent of a kind of Wild Oats sewing tour of the world, and she's having all of these affairs, and she's throwing caution to the wind, and men are buying her things, and she's trying to be cavalier. It's not what's in her heart, but it's what she's doing because she wants to pretend to be modern and to be okay. And so the result of that is some really racy, stylish, a lot of innuendo, of course, given the time period, but not that subtle, right? I mean, not that subtle at all. I think about that great scene with the montage of all the hands. That's all about the exchange of like jewelry for sex.
Oh yeah, they don't hide it.
They don't hide it. So it's one of the fun things about watching these films. But what I always think of is that Parrott again was basing these films on her own life experience and her own disappointing ends to two relationships: her first marriage and then one with her lover, Hugh O'Connor. And what would it have been like? I have no documentation of what Ursula Parrott thought of either of these films, either Strangers May Kiss or The Divorcee. But what would it have felt like to sit in a movie theater and basically see a version of your life with Norma Shearer as you, kind of playing out these scenarios and these things that you've done and these things that you've felt, again, I would love to have like had a cocktail with her at any place she wanted to have, and have this conversation and hear what that felt like.
Yeah, and you can imagine it's the dawn of sound, so a sound picture on top of it. They're only a year or two old at that point.
That's right.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, a lot of the you've probably seen this. A lot of the advertisements for The Divorcee say all talking.
All talking, yeah.
Just to make sure that people knew they were coming into a talkie. And I actually think the dialogue is very natural. I think it's I always think about the way that Norma, she can't. Yeah. She has that very mannered, voice-coached voice sometimes everyone in that early sound period that was trying to speak the new Hollywood English.
Was it the Mid-Atlantic, where it's not quite English, British? Yeah.
Exactly. So, so the fact that these, and I think one of the reasons Norma Shearer won this award is that it really is an incredible performance. Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of earnestness to it, even when she's playing like the cavalier woman on the town. She has such a beautiful, natural style.
Yeah, she gives it her all. And people might think it's a little affected looking at it now, but if you look at films of the period, Joan Crawford, every other major actress were still finding themselves.
Yeah.
So for her to be able to get this characterization into a film, this is her third, fourth talkie. So it's pretty incredible that she's able to convey what she conveys.
Yeah.
And when you do get in the film, it's a little like at the beginning you're getting sort of used to that style of acting.
Yeah.
And I always say give it like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like you get through the first 10 minutes of the movie and you really start getting into the meat of it, and you're like, wow, this is really good, like solid.
Yeah, I just showed the Divorcee to a largely college-aged audience at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and it was incredible to listen to these young people's responses. They were talking at the screen. I mean, first off, the male character is so despicable in so many ways. And some of his lines, they would be like, no! You know, they would just yell. And I love that they got so interested in and engaged with this film. And some of them came up to me afterwards and said, you know, this is the first black and white film I've ever seen. This is the first pre-code film I've ever seen. And like, I loved it. And are they all like this? I'm like, yes, they're all like this.
Watch all of them,
Sorry,
please.
little lie, but both of those are really good ones.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it just strikes me when you see those films how they resonate still today. The message, the plight of the women, it hasn't changed that much in all these years.
Yeah.
And seeing those films really drives that home, and seeing it with an audience of people who are a complete blank slate and younger with a different perspective.
It's the best.
It's the best.
It's the best. Yeah, so one of the things both of these films are about, because both of the books are about this, is the double standard.
Yes.
Right? That men hold themselves up to one kind of moral code, but they don't expect women to do anything that pushes them outside of the kind of female version of that code, which is they have to be as clean as women of the Victorian age. They use that word clean
a lot,
right?
Yeah.
Which is in the Divorcee, I thought you were the cleanest woman in the world. It's so brutal. That's a really hard scene to watch. So yeah, that Parrott was pointing this out. She was not afraid to call men out for sexual harassment. I mean, she talked about the way one of her publishers used to, kind of get handy with her when they had meetings. She talked about a banker who tried to convince her to make her interest payments in favors to him, and she wrote in a letter to someone, I pay him 6% just like everyone else. The answer is no. So she was really aware of how much, I mean, this is so relevant in a time of Me Too and all of this stuff. So it's not like she called out these problems and then, oh good, it got fixed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish it were that simple. But I think people reading this today are going to really be touched, because I have been. I've been reading it going, oh, I'm like that. Oh, I can, I've seen a lot of my own experiences in hers across all this time.
Yeah.
And it's really incredible.
I've heard from so many people who have read either my book or Ex-Wife and said, like, I cannot believe how resonant it is still today. This doesn't feel like an outdated book of almost 100 years ago. This could be like Sex and the City. This could be, Nora Ephron. This could be like, there's a kind of timelessness to a lot of the concerns and ideas. And if you take away I guess there's speakeasies are back, so 20s fashion back. Okay, maybe it is like
just add cell phones.
Yeah,
what comes around goes around.
Yeah.
Another thing that I learned last night at the book signing that we were at Chevalier's was the fact that if you wanted to read after your book, if you wanted to read the literature of Ursula Parrott, Ex-Wife is the only one of her novels that you can even find. Yeah. Tell us how that can get fixed, because that needs to get fixed.
Well, first off, if anyone out there works in publishing and would like to publish some really amazing writing that I think would find a readership, feel free to email me. I'm very easy to find. I teach at North Carolina State University in film studies, so you can Google Marsha Gordon and get me there. I have a table of contents ready for you of short stories, of a serialized novel, my favorite one called Breadwinner from 1933, which is about a young woman who's a single mother who starts working as basically like a secretary to an East Coast film studio and ends up becoming this incredibly successful screenwriter. And it's about the man who she's in love with, who is not as successful as she is, loses his job, but realizes he really didn't work that hard anyway, that he was lucky just to be getting the paycheck, and only will have an affair with her, but he won't marry her because she makes more money than he is, and it damages his pride, and so on and so forth. And it's just an incredible story. It's so contemporary, just like these questions about equality and inequity and hypocrisy and the double standard, and she goes back and forth between the East and West Coast, and it takes place in all these cool New York locations. But there's a number of Parrott novels, like Next Time We Live, which was adapted into Next Time We Love. You want to know why they changed the title?
No. Yes, I mean, yes, I do.
I was like, uh-oh, she can't handle the truth.
No, I can't handle the truth.
You're going to like this.
Yes.
It's because they were concerned that audiences would think it was about reincarnation. Oh. So they insisted on changing it to love, which is so funny because one of the things that Parrott got pigeonholed at was as a woman's writer who would write romantic fiction, which her novels are not at all made in the romance genre at all. They use that in order to like talk about all these other things. But so the Next Time We Love, which is Jimmy Stewart's first starring role with Margaret Sullivan, it is a phenomenal film. When I've been touring the country and showing that film, people are blown away by it. It's the most interesting, mature relationship about these two career-driven people who fall in love, they get married, but they're both so driven that their careers keep them apart. So he pursues his journalistic career overseas. She pursues her theatrical career in New York. And they basically live their whole lives apart because they both want the brass ring of success. And at the end, like, it really asks, like, was it worth it? Did we make the right decision? Wow. And the line is, next time we live, Christopher, maybe we'll have time for each other. It's a really heartbreaking line, but that, I mean, don't we all ask the question of, like, how should we spend our time, right? Like
every day.
And like, is it, like, what balance do you want between your life, like, and is your life work? And is work your life? And so I think Next Time We Live is an astonishingly good novel that deserves to be republished. Strangers May Kiss is very interesting.
Oh, I want that novel.
Yes, right. This, where's that beautiful edition? Oh, here it is.
Here it is.
So this is the Darin's beautiful Strangers May Kiss Hollywood edition with Norma on the cover in her beautiful dress.
And Neil Hamilton.
Sorry.
Commissioner Gordon that nobody ever points out.
Yeah, author of Ex-Wife there on the cover. Because of course, and all the studios, by the way, when they bought Parrott stories to make, I mean, the advertisements, Parrott gets top billing. So for example, Next Time We Love, it's Margaret Sullivan, Ursula Parrott, same font, Jimmy Stewart, like little tiny font.
That just, to me, shows what a sensation and important person she was to have that kind of billing. Yeah,
absolutely. And then, again, the fact that she, so completely disappeared from everyone's memory and knowledge, I mean, it makes you wonder, like, how many other women, probably, are out there who have suffered similar fates, who have just kind of been dropped by the wayside.
Well, I read a book recently called The Gilded Edge that was about a turn-of-the-century poetess who was in a colony in Carmel with all these men who she kind of had flings with many of them, and it's a very, very sad story, and she eventually died by suicide. And the book shows a lot of her writings and then a lot of the writings of her contemporaries, the men. Hers are so much better. And they kind of passed her around a bit like a party favor. Yeah. They treated her like trash. And then she was the one with the incredible talent, and their work is the work that's remembered today. Yeah. So it's very frustrating, but it's also an interesting book. So I definitely would recommend that.
Yeah. Well, once people are erased, it's hard to bring them back in. So I have this hope that if people read Ex-Wife and are taken with it, that they will teach it. If you are a high school teacher and you are a college teacher, and you will tell your friends to read it, and that's how these things can kind of come back into the conversation. And somebody was, it takes on some pretty challenging subjects. So there's a rape in the book, and there's an abortion in the book, and they're written about with great sensitivity and great. I would think it's one of the most moving those scenes are both so moving because it's really Parrott trying to articulate how a woman would cope with something that she, such a horrible experience in both cases, but that, is forced on her for a number of reasons. And somebody, I was at a book club a couple weeks ago, and someone's like, do you think this book will get banned? Because if it does, everyone's going to want to read it. Yeah. And I was like, scarily enough, these are the times we're living in. Maybe it will happen.
When I was a kid, there weren't books that I remembered being banned from school, but there were books that were conspicuously not on the curriculum.
Yes.
And I found out Catcher in the Rye was not on the curriculum, and I thought, no one is going to tell me what to read. I shall be the judge of it. So the minute I heard it was, not on the list, I got it and read it that day.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I cannot see what the fuss is. Why are people so up in arms? It's a young man who just wanders around New York City. I don't get why this is so controversial.
Yeah.
But I remember I had a high school teacher describing Blue Velvet as a tawdry piece of trash. I rented it that night.
Yeah.
And while my parents were out, I watched Blue Velvet. To me, I don't like anyone to tell me what to think.
No.
I want to think for myself.
Yeah.
And I hope, like crazy, there are a lot of other people who will too and say, you ban all you want. I'm going to find that book and I'm going to make my own decision.
That's right. That's the spirit.
Yes.
And hopefully her books will find a new life.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So bottom line, I am doing everything in my very limited power to try to interest publishers in doing a collection or republishing some of her other works. I had nothing to do with the McNally republication. It came out the week after my biography of Parrott came out, and that was just finally, I think, Ursula getting a favor from the universe. She deserves a lot of favors. So maybe it's the start of favor season for her.
Let's hope so. Well, in talking about food, because that's also part of what we do at Hollywood Kitchen, there are not Ursula Parrott recipes. So we went with a Norma Shearer recipe. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk about Ursula Parrott and her relationship to food, because that does come into play here.
Yeah.
So tell us how Ursula felt about food and what she wrote and had to say about food.
Yeah, so she is very interesting on the food front because this is one of the many things in which she is grappling with this question of like how women are navigating the world. And one of the things that she saw is that, okay, if we live in a culture now in which divorce is easy, relatively easy, and then of course, in her mind, remarriage, inevitably the goal to come next, then women have to stay kind of forever 21. And they have to continue to look good because the goal is always to get the next husband. And I realize that this is not the most radical or progressive idea, but it's something that she was really interested in kind of thinking about. And she also saw the way that she treated food as a comfort when she was depressed, disappointed.
Guilty.
I mean, who doesn't, right? So first off, I brought with me, I found that Ursula Parrott did a series of publicity, like advertisements for the state of New York's Dairy Council. And so this is one she did called Follows the Milky Way, and in which she is talking about the fact that the great thing about drinking milk is that you can do it without adding an ounce to the figure. So this is diet food, milk. Okay, who knew? Feel free to Milk Council people if you're out there to use that slogan again. But she also published this really interesting article in Ladies' Home Journal called Nice People Don't Eat. Quite a title. Nice People Don't Eat. And in it, she's really honest with the readers of Ladies' Home Journal about the way she, first off, she used to be able to eat chicken patties, peas, a fantastic dessert called chocolate ice cream cake, which is a compound of cake, chocolate ice cream, a pint or so of fudge sauce, and 2 or 3 dozen pecans floating about in the sauce with some whipped cream splashed over everything, which sounds pretty good. But she used to eat meals like this all the time when she was young and active and swam and ran and did all these things. But as time passed and as her metabolism changed and as her passion for such foods did not go away, that she found herself struggling with her weight. So when she came to Hollywood, she worked with Sylvia of Hollywood, who was the masseuse to the stars and had her own diet books, and who Norma also went to.
Yeah,
Tell us about Sylvia of Hollywood.
Sylvia was just this character of a woman who was known for beating the fat out of the muscles and toning the muscles by beating you. So Norma is actually quoted a couple times about going in to see Sylvia and her beating her ankles and her, her upper arms into shape because she'd been an athlete as a child. So Sylvia she was a fad for a minute, but then she also didn't keep her mouth shut. So I think
so let's just say, when I think you were an actress on the table getting pummeled by Sylvia, like a hairdresser relationship, you tended to talk about what was going on in your life, and Sylvia told all in a series of articles in Photoplay magazine, and then it was published as a book, and people were not happy.
Yeah, she did an article on our friend Mary Carlisle. And the article is a picture of her that says, "Too pretty to be plump." And it is 3 pages of Madame Sylvia saying why Mary is so unattractive because she's plump.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah, really brutal.
Not very nice.
Wow.
Not what you really want your masseuse, who you've been like naked on the massage table with, to write an article
and
about.
She was 19. It was baby fat, if anything. She was never a plump girl.
Yeah, so Parrott, when she came to Hollywood, she started going to Sylvia right away, and she did say Sylvia took a couple inches off her waist in a month, and so she adhered to Sylvia's diet, which her diet books are I think the advice that Parrott gives in this Ladies' Home Journal article, this is from 1941, by the way, so this is a decade after she first comes to Hollywood. In terms of the diet she recommends, which is tomato juice, grapefruit juice, skim milk, black coffee, no salt, an egg without salt, 2 graham crackers, 4 prunes. It's one of these extreme diets. I think a lot of that came from Sylvia's influence, just kind of put through the blender over the course of time.
She recommended that Norma eat yeast so she would feel full. So she would go to fittings and she would fill herself with yeast before she would blow up, but so she could get through them and be as thin as possible.
Wow.
And I couldn't imagine. And she would come in. Adrian talks about it in his unpublished autobiography about her having these little packages of yeast. And when 3 or 4 or 5 hours into a fitting, everybody else would be passing out, and Norma would just be eating yeast the entire time.
Wow.
I want to read that transcript.
Yeah, well, I'll get it to you.
Ooh.
But anyway, the bottom line is she struggled. She struggled with trying to maintain that, that look that she had when she was 19, 20, 21. And she dealt, Parrott also dealt with alcoholism and some significant challenges to her mental and physical health, and so she was really fairly honest with talking to the public about that, which again I think is extraordinary.
Really rare. Yeah, I mean, people were just obsessed with their weight.
Yep.
And any of us know, being around our grandparents, that was always the first thing. Is oh, she's a little chubby, or she would be, her face is so pretty.
Yeah.
All those things that they would say, and they'd say to men and women.
And it was so much worse here, right, in Hollywood, the worst, because you just couldn't get away. You couldn't get away with an extra ounce, right?
And we still have that today, because I feel like if women get any work done, they're made fun of. If they don't get work done, they're made fun of.
Right.
And the human body just changes over time for most of us. That is a reality.
Yeah.
But I feel like we are so ready to attack and criticize, and I think that's such a toxic thing in our culture.
It is.
Why can't we just embrace who we are, how we are, and where we are, and not have to be felt or shamed because of our looks?
Yeah.
So it is great in 1941 that she's addressing that.
Yeah.
So publicly.
So publicly, and actually the article, the pictures aren't good in this version, but she includes a photograph of herself at her heaviest in this article, along with herself, after she went on this diet. That's very bold to show yourself. That's very vulnerable,
very vulnerable
in that way. So, but the bottom line is, we decided it would not be that interesting to have a glass of milk or a cup of coffee or a half a grapefruit as the recipe, right? I mean...
Well, Darin found the recipe that we're going to talk about. This came from Photoplay, right, Darin?
Yep.
I think, 1931 or
31.
thereabouts? 31. And it came from an article called Choice Hollywood Recipes, which we have a printout here. Now, we have a database of Norma Shearer recipes, because she was so darn popular. They're always coming up.
She didn't cook, though.
She did not cook. She probably didn't know where the kitchen was in her house, if we are honest about this.
Yes.
But this recipe is I was interested in it because it's something we haven't really tried on Hollywood Kitchen yet. This is a recipe where you basically take the pit out of an avocado, and you take some cream, an egg yolk, mix it with crab meat, and cayenne pepper, and then you scoop it out, put it in the avocado, put salt and pepper and Parmesan, and then put it in the oven until all the cheese melts.
So it's a hot avocado stuffed with crab meat.
Yes. And we made this last night at Darin's loft, and we found about 15 to 20 minutes in the oven was actually what we needed.
Wow.
We went, I think it was my fault, we went a tad bit overboard on the cayenne, and I had to drink like 2 gallons of water because I was breathing fire.
We were crying.
We were crying. It was crazy. But we're going to unveil the avocado a la Norma Shearer from a 1931 recipe.
And they actually,
Wow.
when they're warm, and we finished our avocados, we were really surprised. We kept eating. We're like, this is actually hot avocado, you know? Like, it was actually really...
I wonder who wrote the recipe.
That guy did.
This guy did right here.
Okay.
Mr. Wolf.
Mr.
Edgar
Wolf.
Allan Wolf.
Edgar
come
Allan
on.
Wolf.
Yeah.
Kid you not.
That's a made-up name,
Isn't that great?
right?
Edgar Allan Wolf, one of the capital's most popular hosts and...
One of the film capitals. And raconteurs.
So,
And it is avocado a la Norma Shearer.
and he designed all these recipes for his favorite actresses. So this was the one that he designed for Norma.
And
And
Darin-
supposedly made it for her.
Darin mentioned this is supposed to be like a main entree with a meal, but I could also see this as like a side dish, as a thing you might have at a ladies' bridge club kind of a situation. Do you want to try to eat some on camera here, Darin?
We can definitely try it.
can definitely
I
try
want
it.
to see what it's like cold.
Yeah, I do too, because we had them hot last night.
And Marsha's vegetarian, so so she can just enjoy us.
She can just
watching
enjoy
it.
us doing this. Okay. So we're going to scoop out the cheese, crab meat, avocado.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here goes nothing.
I'm doing the Ursula Parrott version.
Mm-hmm.
I'm abstaining.
It's actually really good.
Good cold?
Mm-hmm.
Room temperature or cold?
It's cold. I think it's like tuna, but it's crab, so it's cold.
Okay.
So the coldness makes it a little like a salad. It's good.
So spicy.
That cayenne. Well, you told me to put more in, and
I know, that's my bad.
We went a little overboard.
But there's no measurements, right?
No
No.
measurements
So
at
that's
all.
the thing about these recipes, like how, like it's such a funny thing, right?
Yeah, and it said 1 cup of cream, which we put a cup of cream. We ended up having maybe a tablespoon.
Yeah,
Because otherwise it was just this watery mess.
And we kept trying to boil it, thinking the more we boil it, the thicker it'll get. But then that never happened. And so then we figured we had to just, reduce it to like a tiny splash of cream with the egg yolk.
Yeah. And I think less cayenne, and it just needed more salt and pepper, which we put in it last night, which made it really good. Like
So-
we enjoyed it by the end of it.
So would you make this again?
I would totally make this again.
And your husband enjoyed it
and
when he
just,
got home.
And just having this kind of served this way, I think would be
pretty.
a novel, pretty thing to do for a dinner for something completely different.
Okay, so far in Hollywood Kitchen, we started out with Norma Shearer's oatmeal sticks, which was kind of a disaster.
Just bread dough balls.
We
it's awful.
did Norma Shearer's sweet pineapple salad, which Darin and I refused to eat, but his husband took one for the team.
And ate the entire
And
thing.
ate the entire thing.
The entire thing?
Yeah, he said it tasted like a relish to him, and he just kept eating it. And we made, I think, 6 cups, and he proceeded to eat all 6 cups.
But it was like green
Waste not
Jell-O with olives and mayonnaise and pineapple
And almond slivers.
And almond slivers.
Ooh.
Served on a bed of lettuce with a dollop of mayonnaise.
Who
Yeah.
wrote that recipe? Do you know?
It was,
No,
I think,
just publicity.
Yeah.
sure
Oh,
publicity
okay.
probably. And then so we did the oatmeal sticks, the sweet pineapple salad, and then I think our first Norma hit that we tried was the Norma Shearer chocolate Antoinette. We knocked it out of the
Chocolate
park.
mousse.
Chocolate mousse.
How can you go wrong with a chocolate mousse?
Yeah, so that we are determined here at Hollywood Kitchen, no stone goes unturned as far as Norma Shearer and recipes go.
And I think this one
And-
less cayenne pepper. Because it
Less
said
cayenne?
a dash, which we tried a dash, we had no flavor, so then we did a lump, which was just too much.
Too much.
How many more recipes do you have to get through
Oh gosh. Let's
lot.
of
see.
Norma's?
There's a beef tongue, which I'm really not willing to go down
Was
that
it
road.
sweet and sour tongue?
Sweet and sour tongue.
Yeah.
There's a fruit cake, a fudge cake. I think there's a pineapple pie. There's
lot
like
of
a
sweets.
lot more.
Lots of sweet.
Was she into sweets in real life?
No.
I think the thing about these celebrity cookies is I think having sweets, it's such a crowd pleaser because everybody likes them usually, and it's something that the average person can go, oh, I'll make that.
Yeah.
And then I think it's more accessible because some of the recipes you read and you're like, I'm really not going to do. Like I recently pre-recorded a Buster Keaton one, and they sent me a lobster thermidor recipe, and I wrote back,
No.
way outside my pay grade, send me something else. And some of them are like, this is so funny. I tell the story. When I first started doing Hollywood Kitchen, I've had to learn a lot about these recipes and stuff. I didn't know what sweetbreads were. And I called a friend and I said, I don't get it. Like, am I supposed to soak a bread loaf under water?
With
And she's
sugar?
like, what do you mean? And I go, it's a sweetbread recipe. And there's like this silence on the phone. And she's like, you know what sweetbreads are, don't you, Karie? And I go, sure I do. It's bread that's really sweet. And she's like, no, it's not, Karie. So once I figured out it was cow intestines, I mean, I was just like, wow, that changes everything. So, there's some recipes that are so inaccessible to someone like myself, or even maybe an average, person, that.
Well, it's so interesting to me, too, that, again, just kind of comparing this and these other recipes you talked about to what Parrott's talking about in that article. I mean, that is such a pragmatic, like, okay, here's the weight loss. It's like, that's all got to be a whole other genre of celebrity writing, right? Because I'm assuming that some celebrities were brokering in, like, how they actually stay fit and do exercise and eat well. No?
I think, like, Gloria Swanson, because she was a vegetarian,
right.
so she
was
really
super
tapped
into
that from, like, the early
diets, too,
yeah,
right?
I mean, probably 9/10 of them, though, it was just publicity.
Yeah.
Just part of the machine. Her doing the milk.
Yep.
That's just publicity. So whatever book she had coming out at that point with the publicists, like whatever we can do. And I mean, that's kind of part of the Norma Shearer exhibit, was showing Quaker Oats, crossword puzzles, records that were giveaways with oranges, like just all the crazy publicity. And Ursula was the same thing.
Yep.
And when you're that big as an author, I'm sure when McCall's or Cosmo, which are such huge magazines, have stuff coming out on her, they're going to be promoting her anyway in every way they can.
Yeah.
And I think, too, with a lot of these recipes, even if the stars didn't make them, I feel like it's a lens through which to look at their lives, their careers, and them as human beings. So I kind of stand by doing these, even if they didn't know where the kitchen was in their own house.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure they would probably run by them for approval, just like, here's 10 recipes we're going to send out with your name on it. Just make sure they're okay. Because they would generally, especially when you're Norma's level, and probably even Ursula at one point, like they're at that level where like, we're going to do this. And I'm sure Ursula's like, I don't care. And, and Norma was probably like, took out a couple of recipes.
Right.
Like, I would never eat this. So, it's just, again, their name is in print.
Well, what's funny is the earlier cookbooks, I find Gloria Swanson's Devil's Food Cake, Gloria Swanson's Fudge, and then all of a sudden, late 20s.
No sugar.
No sugar. It's the only recipe, late 20s or beyond, I found for her is potassium bone broth.
Oh, come on.
So,
So that's legitimate.
So that's got to be legit, because Gloria Swanson became, I think what they called at the time, macrobiotic. Today we might call that vegan.
Yeah.
But she was no sugars, no carbohydrates. She lived on onions and broths, and I don't know how she did that. But so she was kind of, I would almost call Gloria Swanson sort of a Gwyneth Paltrow type figure of her time, because she was an early advocate for eating a lot of this stuff. And some of it made sense, some of it was utterly crazy. But I'm sure that she...
And I believe she believed in fasting too, basically intermittent fasting. And Parrott in Nice People Don't Eat argues about that 2 days a week you need to have this day where you have, like, I think it's 16 ounces total of liquid for the day, and that's it. And it's just can be broth and a little bit of juice or whatever. But it's funny, that's like all the rage now, right? Intermittent fasting.
Yeah. And I bet that stuff actually has a hint of truth to it.
Right.
That's where she actually did give input.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the case.
I don't know how people do that. Like, if I don't eat periodically, I will get headaches really badly. I will be hangry.
Yeah.
So
I get hangry too.
You don't want that.
No, you do not want that. I can do it between like 9 at night and 6 in the morning.
Same.
It's just you and your husband, so you're fine.
Exactly. I can do that. I can handle that. But other than that, no. Not going to happen.
Yeah, so any final words on Ursula?
She's amazing. Read her book. Well, you can read mine too. Yeah. I would be honored if you do read my book. I am really love to hear from people after they've read it, to hear what they think about it. So
they really are companion pieces.
They are. They work really well together. Somebody asked me, which order should I read them in? I'm like, dealer's choice, reader's choice, because on the one hand, like, do you want like the context and the history first, or do you just want to experience the book and then go, wow, who's the woman that wrote the book? So anyhow.
And also, if you can, I always encourage you to buy these from independent book dealers.
Yes.
I think Larry Edmonds is going to be down here at the barn over the weekend selling these books. And also Chevalier's books on Larchmont. They've been around since 1940. And Larry Edmonds has been around since, 38?
And I signed some extra copies. So there are signed copies at Chevalier's in Larchmont. So.
And anything you can do to support authors, to support independent bookstores, we recommend.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. And please see my Patreon account if you want to support my work. I am so grateful for you watching, and stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen.
Bye.
Bye.